Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be talking about something that someone wants me to talk about, which I believe that has been some of the questions that some of you have encountered when you go for your interview. So I hope I'm going to address that. So I've been asked if I could talk about my experience in Haematology Laboratory. So before we get into that, my name is Dr. Emmanuel Ogbodo. I've been working in the UK as a specialty biomedical scientist. I'm a lecturer in biomedical science here in the United Kingdom. So now let's get into that. Now you've been asked, what is your experience in Haematology Laboratory? Or they could say, tell us your experience in Haematology Laboratory. This is a time to focus on the activities that goes on in Haematology Laboratory. I guess once we are able to know the activities that goes on in Haematology Laboratory, also if we know the sub benches that you can see in Haematology Laboratory, maybe that will help us to be able to address this question. So I guess that we should first of all ask ourselves, what is hematology? So when you say hematology, you are looking at hem and you are looking at logy. So when you look at hem, you are looking at blood. When you look at logy, you are looking at study. So hematology is study of the blood. So in this, because we are studying blood, when you look at hematology, the aspect of blood we are really talking about or going to investigate has to do with subunit like full blood count, coagulation, ESR, hemoglobinopathies, and blood film morphology. Now, let us take this in detail. When you see such questions, although there has been a lot of things that I've said in coagulation or a lot of things that I've said in full blood count or blood film morphology, this may not be the time to start going into too much details of those things that I've said. Remember, you have to be conscious of time. Therefore, what we are going to do now is that I'm going to give you overview of what I recommend you should focus on. Now, some of the things that I've said maybe in my previous videos, what you need to do when it comes to things like that, you can say, for example. Now, when they say, what is your experience in Haematology Laboratory? Or tell us your experience in Haematology Laboratory, you should first of all by saying hematology is a study of blood. And in Haematology Laboratory, we have sub-units or sub-benches which include full blood count, coagulation, ESR, blood film morphology, and hemoglobin variance. Now, you cannot say that in full blood count, we use automation to be able to analyze and investigate the blood cells such as red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Now you can of course mention the parameters of full blood count. Then you cannot say in red blood cell we have red blood cell indices. If you've not watched my video on full blood count, I guess you watched that. So you can mention those red cell indices. Now you can mention the white blood cells, total and differential. Then you also give example of the differential. Then you can of course mention platelet. Now because you have mentioned the parameters, then you can say that with the help of the red blood cell indices, we can be able to investigate some diseases such as, you can mention something like anemia. Then you can say, for example, microcytic or normocytic or macrocytic anemia. Then you can mention a situation, maybe there is a iron deficiency anemia or vitamin B12 or folate deficiency, or maybe due to chronic disease like liver or kidney diseases. You can mention something like thalassemia. You can mention something like hemolysis and so on. So that way you have given them overview of what red blood cell can show you. Now you can also mention things like that with the white blood cells help you to investigate whether there's an infection, okay? Then you can mention the other parameters like neutrophils, lymphocyte, monocyte, erythrocyte, eosinophils, and basophils. Then you can say that each of these parameters indicate a lot of things. Again, you can see my video on full blood count. Now, you can also mention things like platelet help for blood clotting. Okay, so what it means that when there's abnormal platelet, maybe in case of maybe thrombocytosis or thrombocytopenia, that it indicates a lot of things. Then you can give example like I've mentioned on my previous video on full blood count. I hope that makes sense. So now you have talked about the full blood count. You can now say that you can then mention your experience with automation. You can say, I have a good experience in using automation, such as maybe you can mention any analyzer that you've used, maybe 6MES or maybe Beckman Coulter or ABX Pentra, or you can mention something like Siemens. As the case may be, any of the analyzers, you then mention it. So you can say, I've used this analyzer, I understand the maintenance, the troubleshooting of the analyzer, I understand the interpretation of the result, I understand the calibration, I understand quality control, I know what to do when the quality control failed. I also have experience in the factors that can affect full blood count result, such as, so you can give a lot of example, maybe something like cold agglutinin, lipemic sample. Okay, you can measure something like maybe hemolysis and so on. So you can measure something like clotted samples, diluted sample, like I have already said on my previous videos. Okay, so by the time you give that example, now you can answer that you also know what to do when you suddenly notice that your analyzer has started giving you a wrong result. So you can give example of what that you can do. Okay, now after you've said that, you can now talk about validation of result. Then you can say that you have a good knowledge in result validation in full blood count. For example, you are experienced in using some laboratory information management system, which is LIMS. So you can give example of some of the LIMS that you have used. Maybe you can say, I've used Telepath, I've used Meditech, I've used Lab Center. You say, I have used this system to validate the result. Then you can say that you also understand when to phone urgent result in Haematology Laboratory. For example, in a case of newly suspected presented leukemia, or in a case of AML or CA, as the case may be, you can give those examples. So by the time you highlight all of that, you can also say that, I forgot to mention that maybe when you talk about the factor that affect full blood count result, you could mention something like O sample, wrong sample in tube, and all of that. That way you have covered overview of your experience in full blood count. Then from there, you can then move to maybe something like ESR. You can say that ESR is, which means erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Okay, it measures how speed the red cells can sediment. Okay, and this can give a strong indication in a case of inflammation. I have experience in the processing of ESR, both using manual techniques or manual method and automated techniques. Now, if you have used automated techniques, it would be nice to mention the kind of analyzer you have used. For example, something like 6MES interliner. Then from there, you can move to coagulation. Then you can say that coagulation, of course, is the department of the hematology where we investigate clotting system or clotting cascade or clotting pathways. Okay, then you can mention things like in clotting pathway we have intrinsic, extrinsic, and common pathway. That is what the routine coagulation tend to investigate. For example, that PTR now investigate extrinsic pathway, while APTT investigate intrinsic pathway, and fibrinogen investigate common pathway. Now you can mention something like D-dimer. You can say that D-dimer, on the other hand, may investigate fibrin degraded product. That these are the routine tests in coagulation. Okay, then you can now say that depending on the result that you get, it can suggest a lot of things. Then you can mention that one of the things that affect coagulation are also pre-analytical phase, as commonly seen in other tests. For example, if the coagulation sample failed the Hill test, it can affect the result. Something like hemolysis, hysteresis, and lipemic, that they can affect coagulation result. Okay, and also if the sample is clotted or underfilled, as the case may be, it will also affect coagulation result. Okay, now you can move ahead and say that sometimes from the result, it can suggest a lot of things. Maybe that patient being on anticoagulant, or maybe some other condition like liver disease or kidney disease, as the case may be. From the result obtained from the coagulation, it can suggest where there is maybe factor deficiency or an inhibitor, something like that. Then you can give example. For example, maybe in a case of raised PT-RNR, you can talk about the mixing study, the things that we've said there. I hope this is making sense. You can say, I've used some analyzer in investigating coagulation samples. You can give example of the analyzer that you've used. For example, I have used TOPS 550 to investigate, coagulation, okay? And I understand how to do the weekly maintenance, daily maintenance, okay, monthly maintenance. You understand the performance of the quality control. You know the factor that can affect the quality control, maybe in a case of contaminated sample, or maybe when the reagents are not properly constituted. You understand calibration. You also understand the factor that may affect quality control and all of that. That you also know what to do when your quality control sample fails and all of that. So you can say all of that, okay? Now, after you've said that, you can also mention that you also use laboratory information management system to validate the coagulation result, okay? So that you also competent in understanding the importance of phoning urgent result. For example, when INR is maybe greater than or equal to 5.0, that you understand the importance of phoning such result. Now, you can also mention something like, in addition to the routine test in coagulation test, that also from the result obtained, special tests may be required. For example, in a case of missing study where maybe it's correct, which does suggest maybe factor deficiency, that factor assay can be conducted, that you are competent in doing factor assay. You can also say that maybe when it does not correct, which may indicate an inhibitor, that you are competent in processing and interpreting lupus anticoagulant test, thrombophilia, and so on, okay? So you can mention all of those things. You can mention other special coagulation tests such as Van Willebrand test, factor V Leiden, Adams 13. So you can mention all of this, okay? Now you might need to mention some factors that can affect coagulation result, like DIC, like TTP. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So you can see so far I have talked them through on full blood count, I have talked them through on ESR, now I have talked them through on coagulation. From there you can then move to something like blood film morphology. Now you can say from the result obtained from the full blood count, okay, that you might sometimes, have to request for blood film morphology. And from the result of the blood film morphology, it can give further indication. For example, that you are competent in making blood film and staining blood film, that you are competent in using automation as well to make the blood film and also stain the blood film. Now you can give example of any analyzer or automated method that you've used in making blood film or staining blood film, like things like 6-mess SP10 or SP50 as the case may be. Once you have mentioned that, then you can answer that you are competent in the use of microscope, so you understand how to mass slide on the microscope and look at the blood films at different field, okay? So you can now mention what blood film can indicate, maybe anemia, TTP, ITP, leukemia, okay? Anything along that line, maybe post-splenotomy. You can now mention all of those things that that blood film morphology can show. Then you can say that you are competent in them. You can say also that when you look at the blood film, that the result you obtain in some cases would then means that you would then have to alert hematology consultant where necessary. For example, in a case of suspected ITP, that it is an urgent result, you then have to let the hematology consultant know about it, okay? Now, you can mention all of that. Then from there, you can then move to hemoglobin variance or hemoglobinopathy. Now, you can say that under hemoglobinopathy that you are competent in the use of maybe high-performance liquid chromatography, okay, which is HPLC, to perform hemoglobin variance, okay? Now you can give them example. You can say without hemoglobin variance, okay, that it can show you maybe different hemoglobin present in a patient sample. That this is commonly maybe in a case of antenatal screening test for the women who are pregnant, okay. That this can help to see where there's abnormal hemoglobin. Now you can mention some other hemoglobin that can be seen. You can say, for example, hemoglobin A, hemoglobin F, hemoglobin S. You can talk about maybe like something like sickle cell. You can say that hemoglobin variance will help you to understand where possible the kind of hemoglobin that the patient have. This can help to know how to be able to monitor the patient and manage the patient condition as the case may be. Now from there you can talk about something like sickle cell solubility test. So you can say you are competent in sickle cell screening test, where also it involves sickle cell solubility test. If you've not watched my video on sickle cell solubility test, I recommend you should go and watch it. Now sickle cell solubility test, and from the results that you obtain, you can then confirm it if it is positive, which has to do with the turbidity. Okay, now if it is turbid, which indicate that there is a sickle cell, okay, in the sample, what you are going to do then is do high performance liquid chromatography, which is HPLC, to be able to confirm whether or not that patient has sickle cell. I hope that makes sense. Now you can see that from that overview, I have taken them through each of the subunits or sub-benches of Haematology Laboratory. Like I mentioned in one of my videos on your experience in blood bank, once you hear such questions, you should be focusing on the activities that goes on in that department. What are the benches? What are the likely things that goes on there? Once you are able to know the things that goes on there, you then need to talk about them individually. And when you talk about them individually, also remember to talk about the factors that can affect those results. I hope that makes sense. Let me also add something there. So, like when you talk about automation that you've used, the analyzer that you've used, something like maybe full blood count analyzer, coagulation analyzer, and of course HPLC, they are all automation. Now, you might need to also mention something like the principle of full blood count analyzer, which include aperture, impedance, and flow cytometry. Now, if you've not watched my video on full blood count analyzer principle, you can watch that for more detail. Now, you can mention something like a principle of coagulation. You can also say that you have understanding on the principle of coagulation analyzer, which has to do with detection of metallic magnetic bond, following the pipetting of samples and the reagent and incubating and all of that. Once the fibrinogen has been converted to fibrin, or in other words, once there's a clot, there will be increase in the turbidity, and because of the increase in the turbidity, preventing the transparent of the light to be able to see the ball. And once the light is no longer able to see the ball, analyzer know that yes, clot has been formed. So that is how it can be able to detect when clot has formed. So it has to do with the detection of that metallic ball. Okay, so once the analyzer is no longer able to detect the metallic ball, what it means then is that there's a clot formation, and that clot of course has led to high turbidity, which is now why analyzer is unable to detect that metallic ball. I hope that makes sense. Now, why that of the HPLC? What it does, that it has to do with the differential migration through a column. So what happens that there's a column, so each of these very hemoglobin, okay, they will migrate. As this hemoglobin migrate differentially into columns, okay, now if present, that would not generate a peak. Okay, so that is a principle of HPLC. So, and that is why with HPLC, what you are looking at is a peak. Okay, once there is a peak, it then suggests there is that hemoglobin, and what it means that each of the hemoglobin have different peaks. Okay, so for an example, hemoglobin F has a different peak compared with hemoglobin S, compared with hemoglobin A, and so on. So that is how it's able to differentiate different hemoglobin. And of course, you can mention that with HPLC, you can now detect things like alpha thalassemia, beta thalassemia, sickle cell, any of those hemoglobin variants. Now I'm going to see if I can summarize this. They've asked you, tell us your experience in Haematology Laboratory. What you need to then say is that Haematology Laboratory is an aspect of the pathology laboratory that investigate blood or study blood. That in Haematology Laboratory, there are sub-departments or sub-benches, which include full blood count bench, ESR bench, coagulation bench, hemoglobin variance, okay, and blood film morphology. Now you can say in full blood count, we measure a lot of parameters which can give us overview of maybe blood cells, whether they are healthy or not. For example, we measure something like red blood cells, which also include red cell indices such as, you can give example. Now you can also measure something like we investigate total white cell count and differential count such as, you can also mention. Then you can also mention something like thrombocyte, okay, which are platelets. You can say that from these parameters, there's a lot of conditions that you can be able to investigate. For example, in red cell indices, you can know whether there is a normocytic anemia, microcytic anemia, macrocytic anemia, okay. Now, you can give other examples if you want. Now, from there, you can say with the white cell count, it can show you whether there's an infection or maybe leukemia, as the case may be. In thrombocyte or platelet, it can indicate maybe where there's bleeding or where there's a clotting, disorder, as the case may be. So you can mention all of that. Now, you can now say that you also understand that there are a pre-analytical phase that can affect, full blood count results, such as maybe raw sample in tube, or O sample, or heated sample, or clotted sample, or diluted sample. You can mention any of those things that I've already highlighted on my previous videos, okay? Now, you can now further say that you understand the use of automation to analyze full blood count results that you have used. You can mention the analyzer that you've used, okay? Now, you can talk about the maintenance, that you have a good experience in the maintenance or calibration, understand what to do when the quality control sample fell, and all of that, okay? Now, you can talk about the laboratory information management system that you have used in validating this result, okay? Now, you can talk about when to phone urgent result, as the case may be. The same thing is what you are going to do in coagulation. In coagulation, you can say that routine test is PT-INR, APTT, fibrinogen, and D-dimer. Now, you can mention the pathways that each of these determine. Now, you can now say, depending on the results, maybe it might be factor deficiency or inhibitor or problem from the clotting casket or pathways, as the case may be. Okay, you can give example if you want. You can say some of the results gotten can suggest that the patient is on anticoagulant. Okay, you can mention further tests that can be done, like special tests, like I've already highlighted. So you can give all those overview, and of course, like I've said as well, you might need to mention the principle of the analyzer, the same with that of the full blood count as well. Now, from there, you can now move to the ESR and talk about the ESR, measuring inflammation, okay, looking at the rate at which the red cell can sediment. Now, you can mention the analyzer that you've used, or maybe when you've done it manually, you can talk all of that. Now, from there, you can now talk about, depending on the result we get on the full blood count, we might look at the blood film morphology. With the blood film morphology, we have to first of all make the film. You can talk about your experience in making blood films, whether automation or manually. Then from there, you can now move straight to maybe what you can see in blood film, what it may suggest, maybe anemia, iron deficiency, or folate deficiency. Just talk about any of those things, okay? Once you have mentioned that, then of course you can now go to the hemoglobin variants, where you can mention something like maybe HPLC or sickle cell screening, such as sickle cell ability testing and confirming with HPLC. Once you have put all of that together, what you have done, you have given the activities that goes on in hematology laboratory, and you now explain what each of these activities may suggest. Once you have done that, you have successfully expressed your experience in hematology laboratory. And that is my take on that, okay? So what I'm going to say, that I know that I've said a lot of things. So when you go for your interview, it doesn't have to take this long. Know that. You just have to find a way to summarize it, okay? As many points as you can remember, try to put it in, because the more you do that, the more you now stand more chance of saying some things that maybe another person may not be able to say. I hope this makes sense. So yeah, you put a comment on the comment section. Tell me what you think about the video, okay? Like, share, and subscribe. If you want to appreciate the video, you can select on Super Time, and also you can decide to join any of the group of this YouTube channel. Yeah, I hope I've been able to answer the question on your experience in Haematology Laboratory. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much till I come back your way again. Bye-bye.